Hello, and welcome to Picture This, a podcast from the photo archives of the Albuquerque Museum. My name is Jill Hartke, and I'm the digital archivist here at the museum. Today, we try to keep up with one of the fastest and most athletic people to ever call Albuquerque home. In the photo archives of the Albuquerque Museum is a photograph of the finish line of a sprint with a young man named Owen Smaulding about to win the race. Here's the story behind the photograph. Baz Owen Smaulding was born around 1896 near Wichita Falls, Texas. He was one of 8 children born to Baz and Paulina, who had 7 sons and 1 daughter. When the family left Texas, they initially moved to the northeast plains of New Mexico, to the town of Clayton, where Baz ran his own farm and the children helped out. But around 1910, the Smaulding family decided to pack up and move to Albuquerque, doing so in a cattle car and covered wagons. Baz owned land and drove cattle, working the land in the early years of the Smaulding family's relocation to Albuquerque. But within a few years, he found work at the rail yards, and the family moved to the South Broadway neighborhood, living on East Hazeldine Avenue. Not long after arriving, Owen's older brother, Al, began making a name for himself in the boxing ring. By 1913, Al had begun boxing professionally around Albuquerque and as far away as Phoenix and in Mexico. He fought to wins and draws, not losing a fight in almost 3 years. Owen watched his older brother make a name for himself, not knowing that soon it would be his own name headlining the sports sections of the local newspapers. In the early 20th century, most people left formal schooling after the 8th grade, needing to find work to help support their families or set out on their own career path. In Albuquerque, the African American community numbered around 250 in the 1910s, but some families sent their children to Albuquerque High School, even though it wasn't until 1914 that Albuquerque High School allowed African American students to graduate with the rest of their class. Prior to 1914, these students were sent to the University of New Mexico to graduate with UNM's on-site high school graduates. A bizarre stance because black students were barred from enrolling at the University of New Mexico until 1921. But the African American community was taking a stand in Albuquerque at the exact time Owen Smaulding was about to run away with the sporting records. Albuquerque founded its NAACP chapter in 1915 and worked to not only fight for equal rights, but would later lead the fight to retain integrated schools in Albuquerque when other New Mexican school districts moved to segregate their schools in the 1920s. Despite the racism his community confronted within the school system, Owen's choice to attend and graduate from Albuquerque High School set him on a path to achievements, the likes of which the city and state had never seen. By the time Owen became a freshman at Albuquerque High School, he was approaching 20 years old. This was not a strange age to be enrolling in high school at the time. Students that were attending Albuquerque High School were likely to be between 14 to in their early 20s. There had never been an athlete to attend Albuquerque High School like Owen Smaulding. He was fast, he was strong, and he was coachable. He played on the high school's football team, baseball team, basketball team, and would make his presence felt the strongest at track and field meets. In 1917, the Albuquerque High School football team had an undefeated season, in no small part because they had Owen playing fullback. They played and beat the University of New Mexico's team when Owen ran for 3 touchdowns. That same season, in a game against Santa Fe High School, Albuquerque won 101-0. Remember, we're talking football right now, not basketball. Owen scored 7 touchdowns in that game. There was seemingly no sport that Owen didn't excel at during his time in high school, and he loved playing baseball more than anything. Despite being in high school and playing for the high school squad, he also played sandlot ball for local teams including the Albuquerque Grays, Albuquerque Railroaders, and the Santa Fe Nine. These teams regularly played each other, so during one game he would pitch for the Railroaders, and the next week he might pitch for the Grays, or maybe he'd play shortstop. He was such a versatile athlete that every team wanted Owen Smaulding, however and wherever they could get him. And then there was the track and field grounds. During his first 3 years in high school, he won 17 state title track and field competitions and set 7 state records. In his junior season in 1918, he fell over a hurdle during a preliminary race and injured himself, but he still managed to set a new state record in the high hurdles during the final of that meet. The newspaper was filled with the athletic achievements of Owen Smaulding, not unlike their excitement around the boxing prowess of his older brother Al just a few years before. Still, the world was at war during this time, and the high school students could not be shielded from its reach. In 1918, while in high school, Owen was drafted into the U.S. Army and spent about 5 months in military service. The Albuquerque High School yearbook mentions the going-away parties the students would have for the young men of their classes that were called up. After being discharged later that year, Owen picked up his high school career where he left it, and he graduated in the spring of 1919, but not without having to swallow a very bitter pill at the end of the school year. The reason we can only speak of the races won and records set by Smaulding's track and field pursuits for 3 seasons at the state track meet is because we don't know what he would have done in his senior year. In 1919, Albuquerque High School's track team withdrew from the state meet over a question of Smaulding's eligibility. Because of his military service, his schooling was disrupted and he was delayed in re-enrolling for the school year. The state's athletic board decided that delayed enrollment was enough to make Owen Smaulding ineligible to compete in the finals of his senior year track meet, and Albuquerque High School's entire team withdrew from the competition, leaving a bitter end to Smaulding's high school track career. His preliminary races that year showed that he was likely to have set a few more state records in 1919 had they allowed him to compete. But the experience did little to dampen the new high school graduate's love of sports as he moved up to college-level athletics, first at the University of Washington and finishing his business degree through an athletic scholarship at the University of Idaho. Baseball became his career, not just in his college days, but for the rest of his life. At the University of Washington, he played baseball and ran track before he transferred to play baseball and football at the University of Idaho. While in college in Seattle, he played sandlot baseball anytime he could, and his future with the African American baseball players and great teams that would later make up the Negro Leagues began to take shape. When he wasn't playing for the University of Washington, Owen played for the Queen City All-Stars, who were billed as Seattle's most famous colored team in the 1920s. At the age of 30, and with his business degree in hand, Owen played a short time professionally in the Negro Leagues. He was a starting pitcher, and he played for 5 teams over 3 seasons. He began with the Kansas City Monarchs in 1927. He was a starting pitcher, but he also hit a .636 batting average. He spent the 1928 season bouncing between 3 different teams, beginning with the Chicago American Giants, moving to the Cleveland Tigers, and finally ending with the Birmingham Black Barons, where he pitched and played alongside a 21-year-old pitcher named Satchel Paige. The field where he and Satchel Paige played together in Birmingham, Rickwood Field, is today the oldest surviving professional baseball park in the United States. The Black Barons played on the same field as the white team, called the Birmingham Barons, and over the years, those 2 teams regularly showcased some of the greatest talent to play the game of baseball. You can still watch the Barons take the field once a year in the Rickwood Classic game, which honors the history of baseball in Birmingham. Owen Smaulding played just one part of 1 season with the team, but he did not leave the sport when he left Birmingham and the Negro Leagues. He joined the barnstorming leagues of the upper Midwest, traveling and playing for the American Giants and the Gilkerson Union Giants until 1935. Not only a standout player, he was a rarity in general, being one of the only baseball players with a college education. His baseball playing career had come to an end by the late 1930s, but his passion for the sport was still going strong when he began teaching and coaching at Piney Woods School, an African-American boarding school near Jackson, Mississippi. During the time that Owen Smaulding was teaching, the school relied heavily on fundraising. The Piney Woods School formed the International Sweethearts of Rhythm in 1937, which was the first integrated all-women's band in the United States. The band was an all-female jazz band that played concerts around the world, including a USO tour in Europe in 1945. Another fundraising opportunity born during Smaulding's time at the school was the creation of a semi-professional baseball team called the Piney Woods Collegians. who traveled the United States and Canada on the barnstorming circuits, just as Owen had done during his playing days. The baseball team from Piney Woods was marketed as jolly, happy, and a singing baseball team. The story of the school's baseball team is fascinating, not in the least because of the way that the team was used to recruit boys from northern inner cities, especially Chicago, to come south to get an education in a rural setting and play baseball for a team that the school practically guaranteed as a direct route to the Negro Leagues. The school recruited former Negro Leagues players like Owen to coach and teach and help to bolster the reputation of the school and make it attractive for families in the North. Owen stayed only about 5 years as a teacher and coach at Piney Woods, but the touring of the band and the baseball team kept that school afloat in the 1930s and 1940s. Now, the Piney Woods School is known as Piney Woods Country Life School, the largest and second oldest continually operated African-American boarding school in the country. In the early 1940s, Owen left Mississippi to return to Chicago to play for the Palmer House baseball team at the world-famous Chicago Landmark Hotel. Baseball was such a popular sport in Chicago that the hotels would have teams so that their guests could enjoy watching a baseball game during their stay. The Palmer House Stars was the African-American baseball team, made up of employees of the hotel. The Stars were a highly sought team, and they often played Negro Leagues teams as they barnstormed across the country. The baseball teams at the Palmer House folded, but Smaulding continued to work at the hotel and also ran a business until he retired in 1961. That same year, in March, he returned to New Mexico to be honored by Albuquerque High School for his athletic achievements as an Albuquerque High School all-time athlete. That December, Owen Smaulding died in Chicago at the age of 64. He was buried at Fairview Cemetery in Albuquerque, and tributes appeared in the newspaper of the man Albuquerque recalled as the greatest athlete to ever come out of Albuquerque High School, and some say out of any school in New Mexico. In his honor, the gymnasium at the Dennis Chavez Community Center in the area where he grew up was named the Smaulding Center. Thank you for joining us for Picture This with the Albuquerque Museum. Please join us next time as we look at another photograph in the museum's collection.